Hello, welcome back to the channel. My name is Lisa Elvin Steltari, and I am a genealogist and a passionate traveler. Over the last year and a half or so, I've been featuring each Roi King's daughter and getting to know their stories a little bit better. There are over 700 of them, so we have got a long way to go. Today we're featuring episode number 176. But before we get started, let me show you ways you can support the channel. The first three keep you in the know. Subscribe, like, and notify. All of this helps the channel keep growing and all of that. The other way is a financial way, which is now that I have over 1,000 subscribers, YouTube has permitted me to do the super thanks, which is really neat. You can just, express your support, if you will, by just clicking that link. I also have Patreon and Coffee on other platforms, which are another way of demonstrating your support. So I thank you for all of you who have, who have supported me thus far. Really, really touches my heart. Let's get started on episode 176. So today we're featuring episode 176, Jacqueline Heron, and she is a viewer request. I do not have her in my file, so let's get to know Jacqueline a little bit better. Jacqueline was born in 1646 in Paris, France. Her parents were Pierre Heron and Cécile Dupont. As you can see by the map, she was born in the 3rd arrondissement. Remember that Paris is all divided up in little circles. She's in the 3rd circle. And inside that 3rd circle, the church that she was baptized in, the Church of Saint Nicolas des Champs, is a Catholic church that dates from the 12th century. The new church, or the newer church, was built around 1420 and 1480, and then enlarged again in the 16th and early 17th century. The 3rd arrondissement, it's found on the right bank of the River Seine, and is referred to as Temple, or Temple. This sector dates back to the Middle Ages and is the second smallest of Paris's sections, or arrondissement. You can find the oldest living house in Paris, built in 1407. Imagine, if you will, that house stood when Jacqueline was a child, and she could have looked at it. And looking at it, if you're a descendant, you can be seeing the same thing that your great-grandmother did. So I think that's an amazing thing. Another little point of interest is there's also an ancient Jewish quarter, which dates back from the 13th century and is an important part of the Jewish history of Paris. So if any of you who have that in your tree or know someone, this is also part of that history. So after her father's death, she embarked on her journey as a fille du roi. She came to New France June 18, 1665, disembarking in Quebec City from the Saint Jean-Baptiste de Dieppe. She took with her about a dowry worth about 150 pounds. The groom that she would select and who selected her, his name was Jacques Galarneau, and he was born in 1643 in La Rochelle, France. We return again to this area. He was baptized in the Church of Sainte Marguerite. La Rochelle, as we have seen, is an important part of French history, but also of New France, because of the fact that the Huguenots, the French Protestants, so many of them escaped to the New World. So that's part of the history. Her parents' names were Pierre Galarneau and Elisabeth Gouja, which I find really interesting, that name. I'm wondering if it's got some sort of, Dutch or something. I'm not sure. So people who are focusing in on this research, please let me know what you found about that particular last name. Now, of course, it is part of the Nouvelle-Aquitaine region, and it is part as well as the département is Charente-Maritime. And as I talked about, La Rochelle is such an important part of French history. It was founded during the 10th century and became an important harbor. You can see the harbor as it exists. I mean, it's just phenomenal. It was really, until the 15th century, La Rochelle was to be the largest French harbor on the Atlantic coast, dealing mainly in wine, salt, and cheese, which we all love. The name was first recorded in 961 as Rupella, which in Latin means little rock. just to let you know, Eleanor of Aquitaine, the Lion in Winter, all of that, married Henry Plantagen in 1152, who became King of England as Henry II in 1154, thus putting La Rochelle under English rule. So you can begin to see the early beginnings of that whole Huguenot revolt. It didn't just happen overnight. So it began during this period. During the English rule, they actually built a castle in 1185. It's called the Vauclair Castle, and apparently you can see it in the Place de Verdun. So definitely check it out if that is where you, and I intend, this is like #1 on my bucket list. So many of my ancestors came from here or, left from here. And also I want to point out La Rochelle in English it can be New Rochelle, which, as you know, in New York is a town in New York. So, and was founded by Huguenots. So just so you know, there is that connection. It keeps going. So Jacqueline and Jacques were married October 15th, 1665 at Quebec City at Notre Dame. And just so you know, the marriage record goes 2 pages, so I clipped the marriage records, but that is their marriage record. It's always so good when you have it, because then you have all that history behind them. So they would settle at Charlebourg, and Charlebourg is part of Quebec City now, but originally it was concession of the Seigneurie of Notre-Dame-des-Anges in 1626. And the intendant of justice, Jacques Galarneau, who we've seen so many times, his fingerprints all over New France, set out to establish 3 new villages. And obviously this did not sit well with the Jesuit, who were the seigneurs of the land. However, he just went ahead and did it anyway. So you can see in the upper left corner here, you have the Bourg Royal, and then you have the Charlebourg and Petit Auvergne. So they settled at Charlebourg. And you can see how it's laid out in a square-shaped pattern. And all of the tracts of land point toward that little empty square. That empty square is the church. And so because remember, it was completely dominated by the religion and the church and the priests and all of that. So the fact that the land this was the intent. In other words, all of the land was pointing to the church. And so it kind of signified the fact that the church, everything revolved around that. You can see an aerial view of Charlebourg in the 1960s, actually, and it still retains that spiral and star-shaped pattern. Very few towns in Canada. I don't know of any other countries, but I know there's a few I believe it was Manitoba that were set like that. Just a really interesting, kind of technique because most of the land before just had straight linear to the river, and that's where they were pointing to. The church here is Saint-Charles de Borromée, and as it looks like today. And then you have on the upper right, you have an illustration of what it looked like in 1696. And Charlebourg on the map, just to give you an idea of whereabouts it is. So this is where they would end up settling. So they would end up having 12 children together. Marie would marry Michel Verret and had 4 children, all of whom made it before her early death at 32. Charles would marry Geneviève Greslon and had 4 children, all of whom made it before his own early death at 32. Romain would marry Jeanne Cailly and had 3 children, all of whom made it to adulthood before his early death at 37. Gabrielle would marry Jean-Philippe and have 3 children, all of whom made it. She then married Jean Savard and had 7 children, but none of them survived. Madeleine married 3 times, but only had 1 child who reached adulthood with her husband Charles Delan. Jacques married Marguerite Peniton and had 14 children, 11 of whom made it to adulthood. Jean, Joseph, and Suzanne, nothing. We know that Jacques died in infancy, Joseph also. Suzanne, I don't know any other information of. Jacques must have taken ill because he enters the hospital on December 28, 1700, and dies a few days later on January 1st. He was just 60 years old. He and Jacqueline would have been married 35 years. Just very sad. Jacqueline would not marry right away. She waited a good 6 years before she found a man to give her heart to, I hope. His name was Jean Picard, and he was born in 1661 in Châtellerault in France. His parents were Pierre Picard and Marie Gagne. Châtellerault gets its name from a castle that was built in the 10th century. In the 1500s, the Henry IV Bridge over the Vienne River was built between 1575 and 1611. And so Jean Picard would have seen that bridge, the bridge I showed you, right there on the bottom right. And then he was baptized in the Saint Jacques Church. Now Jean was married, and his wife died. He was left with 7 children. So this would mean that Jacqueline would, having raised her children, presumably would become stepmother for his children. So they were married in Montreal on May 9th, 1706. They did not have a long time together, 10 years, and I hope they were happy. Jacqueline would pass away at the hospital of Hôtel Dieu in Quebec City on November 17th, 1716. She was 70 years old. The descendants that would claim her, by 1729, she had 167 descendants between her and Jacques, her first husband. Jean, her second husband, himself would pass away at the age of 67 in Montreal. As always, I love to give you the resources that I use. In this episode, I'm going to focus on Quebec Genealogical E-Society. It's kind of a newer kid on the block, but I have done some webinars with them. They have a lot of really interesting current genealogical information. I would urge you, and it's not that expensive per year to join, and then you have full access, and it's just an e-society, so there's no, any meetings are virtual, so it's a really neat kind of concept, and I really salute the organizers of that particular society. All of the addresses for these resources are listed in the notes. So we end the story of Jacqueline Heron, episode number 176. I'm so grateful that I got a chance to get to know Jacqueline, how she created her first family, and then once having raised them, went on to have a second marriage, hopefully one of love, but also obviously was helping her second husband raise his children. So I really feel her maternal presence. I really feel that she was the embodiment of a mother, maternal figure. So we thank her for her contribution, for her sacrifices, and we bless her memory. And we are always grateful that she touched our shores. Until I see you on episode 177, au revoir.